Thank you for joining us with Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week we invite you to send in your questions and we'll explore the fascinating stories of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. Joining us this week are Justine Lyn and Melissa Toste with Heritage Mississauga. Justine and Melissa have undertaken a daunting challenge of organizing, cataloging, and figuring out what's what in our collections at Heritage Mississauga. And so we thought we'd, in advance of our reopening, we're hoping to kind of formally reopen in August, but in advance of that, we thought we'd share some of the stories of things we found in our collections. And so I know it hasn't been easy and I know it's not done, but thank you for joining us and sharing a little bit of the journey of that you've undertaken, whether you knew it or not a couple months ago. So jump right in. I know, say I know nothing about collections or what's important and why are collections important? Can you give us kind of like that high level view of why we collect stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the artifacts, be them, photographs, objects, archival material, they're kind of what we leave behind in the world, right? Because obviously we're not all staying on this world forever. So they're what we leave behind. And so they're a great look into our past, but also our present, right? Like what things we deem are important, I guess. So from a research perspective as well, that's also really important because, if I'm reading about something, sometimes I don't necessarily understand full, like I can say what happened, but it's always very nice when you can actually show an artifact and be like, well, this was the actual spool that they used to weave, a blanket with, and here's the blanket and here's the spool. And like somehow that it really just gets down to people like a lot more, and they really understand these things and the challenges that people went through. And I don't know, it really connects us. Like there's that feeling, right?
Yeah, objects are like a very engaging story, right? Somebody actually going into a museum and seeing an object is very different from them just reading a textbook about history.
Yeah, definitely. It brings into the real world. And the amount of times I've heard people saying like, oh, this reminds me of something my grandmother had. And, it really connects people with history in a way that they might not have even known was possible. So I love artifacts and collections. Like the artifacts are my babies. That's always what I say.
So I have old stuff. How do we determine the scope and focus of a collection?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you asked that, actually, because a lot of people will come and be like, well, this is old, and it's like, that's great, but in my opinion, that's not really enough sometimes, because and we are limited on space and things like this. And we want to, in Heritage Mississauga's case, be collecting things that are related to the history, past and present, of Mississauga, as opposed to anywhere else in the world. So things that have a history, what we call provenance, have a really strong history to locals that lived here, and communities and families and things like that. Like that's always really special to us. So that's what I would say, was it's the story behind it. And actually I was telling Melissa the other day that when I was in school for museum management at Fleming, I remember we were watching this this video, like we heard about this story about this lady, and she was talking about, she was donating a pillowcase. I don't know where this was, but she was donating a pillowcase, which is, most people are like, like it's a pillowcase, okay. And they brought out the pillowcase to the woman, and she's holding it and looking at it, and she starts just crying because she was like, my mother made this pillowcase and it reminds me of her. And she's like 90 at this point. She's an old lady, right? And so her mother has long since passed, and she's like, and she turns into a little girl again. And that kind of, and immediately everyone in the classroom was crying, and we're all like, wow, that's an amazing story, that's a great great piece. So like, it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be anything big or fancy or like really old necessarily. It's like those stories, I think, that really make an artifact special, in my personal opinion. Yeah.
Right. And we should also link to, you had maybe a good segue there where you said at Heritage Mississauga. We of course are not the only entity that collects, nor are we the major collector, so to speak. So we should do a hat tip to our partners in the community, Museums of Mississauga and PAMA, amongst others, that do collections, and of course have their own mandates and stuff. So in terms of focus points and what they're collecting. So I guess maybe rather than just a hat tip to our partners there, and we're happy to put people in touch with other organizations that do collect and can offer their expertise on collections. So the process. You have a bunch of stuff. What do you do with it?
Yeah, and I'm sure that Melissa can also speak to this. In the beginning, it's a lot of matching the documentation, I think, up with the artifact, you know, because we have donation forms and, you know, registrars and things like this. And so we're having to go and be like, okay, so this is that artifact, right? And because in some cases, they might have already you know, numbers attached with them, records attached with them, but sometimes they might not. So, you know, the baseline is you're going to the donation forms and things like this, and you're matching it up, and you're assigning numbers to it. And so you have to actually, you know, put the numbers on the artifacts. So like, I can show you kind of an example of that. If I just put my glove on here. Sorry, I took my glove off earlier. Yeah, so like, you know, I put the number on the artifact, right? Like that, so that it's easily identifiable for us, so that we know. And
associated with its records that we have.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that basically when you are going to our database and you're typing in that number, then, you know, it's the same as what's on the artifact. And so I can go and, you know, I can attach my picture there. I can give the history there, the description, things like that. And it's all associated together, basically. So it's
a multi-step process in that sense, where you're not only cataloging, but you're photographing, you're is that the right word for photographing? And you're creating that record of the physical item itself. So, but then you're also entering it into a database, and
so like it's a multi-step process. And I think like most people in collections would say that the job is never done, you know, because, you know, you're having to do to house the artifact afterwards. And, you know, so we have like acid-free tissue paper and things like this. And then we have to, but that even then it's not done, because then we have to go back and we have to inventory it and periodically and things like this. So yeah, it's not, the work is really never done. So, and in a way, that's what I like about it as well. It's never a dull moment. So.
And can you describe a little bit, maybe just jump back to finish a thought I had earlier, and I apologize, I didn't cycle back to it first, but when someone makes a donation to us and we have these donation forms and we transfer care and ownership to the organization, whether it be Heritage Mississauga or the museums or whatever, we are then obligated to care for that forever, in that sense. And can you talk about kind of just the I don't know if ethics are the right word, but that model of care that you then assume as an organization?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is like I was kind of saying earlier, it's like, yeah, the artifacts are kind of like my babies, because, you know, you, like you're saying, you have to assume care of that. So, you know, things like, you know, you're handling it with the utmost care. I mean, and you're housing it properly. Like I was saying, you know, acid-free tissue paper, at the phone, things like this, that are going to basically help to, deter the deterioration. So it's like kind of stopping like the deterioration, or not necessarily stopping it, because, you know, an old thing is going to be old, but, you know, making sure that it is not,
there's conservation efforts.
Yeah. Well, we call it like preventive conservation, basically. So you're preventing it from like really deteriorating more than it would normally, I guess. So also too, though, I should say most of the wear and tear on an artifact is going to happen before it comes into our hands, but, you know, our job is to, you know, care for it lovingly. So
I was gonna say maybe the neat thing about artifacts in the sense of, you know, before they come to us, is they're objects that have been used, right? Like that these are things that have had regular use, were probably in their initial, I don't know, when they were made, was never with the idea of being saved forever. And so, you know, I know in our collections we have things like cameras, and cameras are functional things that, you know, get upgraded over time. And, you know, I don't know about you guys, but how many people keep old cameras around? Like, just in your own personal care. But okay, let's jump into some of the fun stuff, and or at least what I think is the fun stuff. Can you guys give me some just personal highlights of things you've come across, and kind of what makes them important, or what makes them interesting?
Okay, yeah. So the first thing I want to, there's many things I want to talk about, but the first thing I want to talk about is, and I don't have it here unfortunately because it's kind of big, but is this like wall mounted telephone. And it's basically it's made in like the early 20th century, you know, circa like 1900. And basically it's produced by this Canadian independent telephone company. And at the time, and this is what I mean by the kind of interesting stories. So at the time, Bell, as we know, was one of the main providers, if not the main provider in Ontario. But they really only serviced these urban areas. So then you had these independent kind of companies popping up. So there was around 680 non-Bell companies in Ontario. Wow. And they were servicing the rural areas, right? And so the Canadian Independent Telephone Company that this is produced by, they basically would manufacture the supplies, the telephones for these small companies. So it's kind of interesting that it shows up in Mississauga, of course, because at the time we were a rural area. And so that's very different than, you know, what a lot of people would say about Mississauga nowadays, right? So I really like that because it talks about, you know, the kind of development of Mississauga, and how we were, I guess at that time, considered a rural area, basically.
Yeah, so and also the relevance with the outage.
Yeah,
I was just going to say that. I was going to say, should we be going back to this model of, you know, 600 different companies?
Yeah. I know. And then the next one was the desk.
Yeah, this was a really cool item. Okay, this is quite large. Maybe we want to move the camera to show it.
Yeah, I'll just put
it. Okay. Yeah. So this here, if you guys can see.
Yep.
Is a school desk, and when we received this we weren't sure about the story of the item yet, but we knew it was a special piece. You can see here it has a world map. It has these kind of like stamps letting us know information about like the transatlantic routes, like the first transatlantic route. And so it was a really interesting piece. We looked into it and we ended up finding some information about why they were manufactured and who they were manufactured for. So they were done for children, to promote learning at home for children. And they kind of remind us of like an early tablet, like iPad kids.
I was going to say,
I'm going to flip it around.
Pandemic and learning from home.
Yeah. And so it has a scroll here. Be careful with this. So this was the company here that manufactured these. And it does have a copyright that says it's circa 1913. The map seems to be a little bit later, like circa the 20s, but you can scroll here and your kid can learn new topics. So kind of like scrolling the web, which we thought was super neat. And they have all various topics here. They have like geometry, they have art, history. So a really neat object that we actually didn't even realize until we kind of researched it and looked into it.
And it's portable.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, it is portable.
So, but my one of my favorite parts about that particular object is the map, because there's a lot of kind of like I was saying, or sorry, like Melissa was saying, is that it's 1913 is what it says on it, but the map is obviously after 1913, because there's things like, for example, Czechoslovakia is listed on it, which was only formed in 1918, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is not listed because it disbanded in 1918. There's another one, it's like the South Sea Pact or something like this, but basically it was this kind of area of that was given to Japan by, I think it was the League of Nations in 1922. So like things like that, it's very interesting to kind of look at that and, you know, and be like, oh, okay, so, you know, when is this? And it keeps getting like later and later. I remember looking, we're like, oh, okay, so now it's 1922. Okay, now it's this.
And also to wonder how people got this information updated at the time, because you couldn't just refresh your page. You couldn't just update a web page.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's really interesting as well.
Yeah, yeah. And okay, yeah, and then the next artifact I want to talk about were these two. These are basically like cups on your
Okay.
yeah, so they're detachable, right? So which we're not super familiar with nowadays. And these came from the Copeland family of Cooksville. And basically at the time, you know, the men, they'd be wearing, you know, their shirt and a lot of time, like almost like a three-piece suit, basically.
Yep.
And so you wouldn't necessarily see most of the shirt, but the things that you would see were the collars and the cuffs. And those were the parts that would get the most dirty, right? They're like rubbing up against you. Maybe you're putting in your soup. I don't know. But anyways, it was kind of to save time laundering, instead of laundering the whole shirt, they would just launder the collar and the cuffs, basically. I mean, they would also launder the shirt at some point, but like those were the things that they could do, you know, on a decently daily basis. So it's a money saver, it's a time saver, and it's also, you know, if you want to switch out for the latest style of collar, because the type of collars, they did change. Yeah, they were quite high, and then maybe they went lower, and you know, things like this. You know, and same with the cuffs as well. So that's kind of interesting and not something that we normally do nowadays as well. And the next one, sorry, I said there was a few. The next one that I wanted to talk about was this compass. So this was produced in 1918 for British officers in the army, and it's known as a Werner's pattern is what the compass is called, and it's named after the designer, Colonel William Werner. And he was kind of known as this I don't know if rough and tumble is the right word, but this kind of like explorer type person, and he would go all around the world, and you know, he liked to like dig up fossils and, you know, study and, you know, like find different artifacts and stuff like this. And
so we call him antiquarian. I think that would be the best term, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking almost like Indiana Jones or something, I don't know. But yeah, and so he's kind of known nowadays for bringing to light this like archaeological site known as the Cueva de la Pilita. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but anyways, it's in Spain, and it was this cave that this farmer kind of discovered and then told him, and then he kind of brought it to national attention, and it has all these like cave drawings in it, actually, which is kind of cool. So people know about that today, and he's kind of the person whose name is attached to that, and of course the compass. So
and what I like about objects like this is that this is seemingly just a compass, but it's led us to so many different stories.
Yes, definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
Like it can preserve with it so many different stories.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that.
And then the last thing that we want to talk about is technically three things, but it's kind of like one thing.
Yeah.
So I'll show you. It's like looking like this. So I don't know if you can guess what this is, Matthew.
Wow, it's a brownie, right?
Yeah. He's cheating. He's cheating. He's very expert.
Sorry.
Okay, so
Okay, but I didn't say
gonna-
what it was. I just said your name. I didn't say what it was.
So yeah, so it's a box camera, and I'll let Melissa talk to that because she's the camera lady. She's been doing all the camera research.
I've become the camera lady.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a collection of cameras over at Heritage Mississauga, and we've been looking into researching the items, finding out a bit more information about them, and a lot of them look very strange to us. This doesn't really look like a modern camera for us. It just kind of looks like a leather box. So it was very interesting to kind of figure out how they would be used, figure out when they were made. These are some of the earliest Kodak cameras. Yeah. So these are circa 1901 for this one, and like 1903 for this one here. And, you know, the name is one of the first things that kind of caught our attention, and it does tell a story about advertising and about business. Kodak, Eastman Kodak, was interested in making the manufacturing of cameras cheaper and easier for people to use. So he began marketing cameras towards children. And that was his idea for like a lucrative business model, because he would be able to sell it to more people. It would be accessible to more people, kind of creating this like amateur photography business, which is kind of how we know photography today, like everybody with their iPhones.
Yeah.
And Brownies actually comes from a Canadian illustrator. And so he created these like little creatures in his storybooks that were called brownies, and they're like little mischievous creatures, and then they were used in the advertising for these cameras. And in that way, we can think about it as like predating Disney marketing, like a Mickey Mouse camera, except this is like a brownie camera.
Did they live in the box?
Yeah. And eventually they ended up kind of living on a life of their own. They ended up, you know, in the Brownie #2 camera, Brownie #3. They lived on for a while.
So this is another example of a brownie from later on. I think that this one is 1938, to 1954. So
and they still use the name Brownie with them?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this one is actually called the Baby Brownie Special. So I which is why I chose it, because it's cute. But yeah, and I also and going back to the kind of the history behind a lot of the objects, I really like the #1 brownie, the oldest one, 1901, and I think it was discontinued 1916. And this one was actually the donor's father bought it when they were in England, before they actually immigrated to Canada. And he bought it with cigarette coupons in the 1930s. So, and then when they immigrated, they brought it over. So that was pretty cool.
So it's
the original price of that camera is $1.
Yeah, the original price of the camera was $1.
Wow. Think of what cameras cost today. When you're going through things, were there anything that surprised you in the collection? Maybe that's a wide statement, but something caught you unexpectedly into its story or something like that.
Yeah, so there was definitely quite a few things. I don't know, weird is the right word, but the weirdest, the strangest one was this one. So yeah, Matthew knows this one. So because I asked him about it, he was like, I don't know either. So this is basically, it's kind of more or less like a wall for candles, you know, for putting them on the wall type thing. And so this one, it's kind of very interesting because the tag on it claims that it was in this kind of community house. I don't know if that's like the right terminology, but a community house for kind of supporters of Chiang Kai-shek, who was the Chinese KMT leader back in the day. And then there was like a lot of unrest, I guess, at that time. So people would go and they would kind of destroy these places. And so it claims that it was blown up and it was salvaged from the ruins and it was the only thing to have survived. And, you know, and it's very dramatic. deck like this. So, and we were like, what is this doing here though? Which is kind of random. And the other kind of interesting or weird thing about that is that, and I won't read it out, but the tag on it is in my opinion like a little bit, I guess, outdated in the terminology is the nicest way to say it. A little bit perhaps racist. And so, you know, it's one of these things where you sometimes you find things in the collection and, you know, the terminology is outdated and things. And so you have to be able to, you know, talk about that history, but in a new way and a new perspective that is, you know, more modern to our modern sensibilities, I should say.
And it kind of highlights the difficulties of collections also, because these items are kind of difficult to talk about, but we don't want to ignore that history either.
Right. And but there's also a little bit of a mystery because a lot of our collections, I know, predate even myself, and so there's a little bit of an ambiguity as to how some things come into our care or what their origin stories are. And I know this is kind of one of them. We how did it come into Mississauga, let alone us? So there's a background story there that we simply don't know. And like I said, the tag, I remember the tag refers to cash my check, right? As the which was the American slang for the general. But then we did find references to that type of action that were blowing things up, and who knows? Sorry, Melissa, I cut you off there.
Oh no, I was gonna say, you're reminding me that we have that photograph that we don't know how it got here. And we're gonna try to return it.
Oh yes. Well, we'll see about that. But yeah, we have another photograph in the collection that's of a soldier, but the soldier is living all the way out in Britain. So we're like, where did he come from? But you know.
How does it end up here? How does a picture of a British soldier who was killed in the First World War who had no Canadian connection, how does the picture of that soldier end up here? And again, trying to find appropriate homes for them. Was there anything that you in the collections that you considered? I mean, we just saw something that was a little odd, but that, you know, either odd or strange. I'm trying to think like how give us that feel for an audience that might be curious of an oddity that might be in your collection.
Okay, so I don't have it here, but another thing, some other things that were kind of odd were sorry, I'm just like laughing as I'm saying just reminding me of it. So I'd be like, you know, because you know our stuff hadn't been inventoried in so long, so I'm going through boxes and you never know what's in the next box, and then you know I look in a box and it's like all tissue paper, all ethifoam, and you're like, oh, okay, like is there even anything in here? And then you're looking and then you're bringing it all out, and then there's just a single like a braid of hair, like someone's hair. And it is actually it's a member of the Greeniest family of Sheridan. So yeah, and so they braid the hair and they cut it off and they saved it, and now we have it. And I definitely scared Melissa with that a little bit. I was just like, look in the box, don't say anything, look in the box, you know. We also have a hair wreath as well from the Greeniest family. People would do that a lot of times as kind of like a memento mori, or for other reasons. You know, I think that one was for her one of the Greeniest ladies' weddings or something.
It was her hairpiece that she wore on her wedding day.
So you want to kind of like preserve that special moment. Anyways, so they make these like kind of intricate wreaths out of hair, and nowadays we're just like, icky, like, you know, like it's important to keep, it's an important piece, but it's just funny because, you know, you're just searching through things and you're like, oh god, more hair. Those are some of the things that comes.
I was gonna say my personal favorite still remains Gaylord the Owl. So I mean that's a
oh yes, he's actually right behind the camera.
He's staring at
you. Yes. But it is we have some neat things that have come into our collections over time, and we encourage when we are reopened again, come and see us. We'll have things out on display. I know we have an upcoming camera exhibit, and I don't know, Melissa, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Yeah, of course. So I think that one will open in August with the reopening, and it'll be a free exhibit. It is history through the camera lens. So as I was saying, we have a collection of cameras, but really connecting that to our scope and our mission here at Heritage Mississauga. And so thinking about what the cameras would have witnessed throughout Mississauga's history. And it's really interesting to see how it parallels with the history of photography, with the history of cameras, connects it to Mississauga's history. So the Brownies will be on display. It's going to be cameras, from the turn of the century, from 1901, as we just saw, all the way until 1999. And so it tells a really interesting story. It's a cool way to have a different perspective on Mississauga's history.
Yeah.
Perspective and cameras. There's an irony in that. But no, I know the collection is a broad one with our cameras, but what I saw of your the text panels you've been working on for it, it's just a really neat perspective to think of what the camera has seen. I always when I look at old buildings, I always like to think of it in terms of what the buildings have seen, and so we take pictures of buildings, right? So this is the cameras offer a different perspective into our history. I think it's a fascinating one. Anything else you'd like to share on just mysteries of the unknown or mysteries of the collection? Yeah, go on.
I mean, we could talk about the industrial spool because I kind of felt that was interesting.
Yeah.
We had no idea what it was when we saw it because at this point, we don't recognize items like that. So we were like,
it's like a huge kind of spool. Yeah,
a huge wooden spool. And we were lost. We just said, let's Google images it. Let's Google search it. And then then we find something that looks similar to it online, and then we're able to actually figure out what it is. And now we can tell the story about that industry.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's one thing as well that people sometimes don't really realize with collections and stuff is that with other types of research in terms of history, you're looking at academic writings and stuff like that, but there's very, very seldom do you find academic writings about, spools and things like this. It's a very niche thing, right? Yep. So you're like Melissa was saying, Google is our best friend sometimes. So that's how it all starts, right? And then it snowballs from there, right? And you continue and you learn more. But yeah, I mean, so if you're at home and you have old stuff and you don't know what it is, Google search, Google image search or whatever, that's sometimes how you find these things. So yeah.
I think that to me they offer a fascinating look, kind of a window, if you will, or a peek into the broader history of a community, right? A bobbin is a bobbin or a spool, and you can talk about what a spool does, but then you can branch out into the fact that in Streetsville we had the Kerr Brothers Bobbin and Spool Factory, and so you can start telling those or linking to these placemaking from yesteryear, I guess, in a sense, and placing these into kind of a context of a story of our community. And I think those are fascinating ways. And anything else on the table in front of you that you want to talk about? I can't see what you brought out. So.
Oh no! That's it that we brought out. But okay. Yeah.
Well,
sorry, I brought out more. I didn't know you were so curious.
Well, this is the invite, right? Come and see and
and that's exactly it, because we have so much stuff, and so come and see we're having our online collection is going to be up and running very soon. So I would encourage people, if they're interested in our collections, to contact us, as well as go on our online collection and you know, and look at that. So yeah, and of course our exhibitions, Melissa's bringing out a whole bunch of the cameras, so, and then we're going to rotate, right? So we're going to show many different things throughout the year. So yeah, should be
And just
fun.
for anyone watching this too, just stay tuned. We'll update you as to opening and when the exhibit's up and you're able to come and see it. It's all kind of a work in progress for us at Heritage Mississauga, but we hope we've come many miles to get to where we are, but we still have a little ways to go. But we hope in the very near future we'll be able to update our audience on you know, coming to see us in person and seeing the work that Melissa's been working on with the camera exhibit, but also just our complete reorganization of space. So again, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for kind of sharing what's obviously a passion, and I won't even, it's been fun too. I know there's been some challenges, but I can see the passion and the fascination with the content that we've got, and I thank you for that, and thank you for joining us here and sharing some of the stories. So thank you for everyone for joining us with Ask a Historian. Stay tuned next week for another episode. And as always, sending your questions and we explore different stories of the history of the city of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. And we'll see you next week with another episode of Ask a Historian.